Welcome back to the Brahmin Word, and we are wrapping up with the life of Elijah this week. Not necessarily today, but we are going to be wrapping it up on Thursday. Today, though, we are going to be looking at what does it mean to pass on a ministry, or what does it mean to pass on being a believer to somebody else. And so for Elijah, his time is coming to an end as the prophet of the Lord in Israel. And so he wants to find somebody to take his place. And we saw the name Elisha last week in 1 Kings 19. So we're going to go back to 1 Kings 19, but we're going to start in verse 19 of 1 Kings chapter 19. Hopefully that's not too confusing, but we're going to see the call of Elisha, and then we're going to see how he and Elijah interact when Elijah's time as prophet comes to an end, which will be in 2 Kings chapter 2. But 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 19, let's start there. So he departed, so he, being Elijah, departed from there and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen in front of him, and he was with the 12th. Elijah passed by him and cast his cloak upon him. And he left the oxen and ran after Elijah and said, "Let me kiss my father and my mother, and then I'll follow you." And he said to him, "Go back again, for what have I done to you?" And he came back from following him, and took the yoke of oxen, and sacrificed them, and boiled their flesh with the yokes of the oxen, and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he arose and went after Elijah, and assisted him. So, first off, we have Elijah come upon Elisha as he is doing work. And so we know, for instance, that this young man, this Elisha, is not a lazy individual. He is not one to just sit back and think that, well, the Lord will do what he wants. And so when we're talking about ministry and we're talking about passing on a legacy um, to other believers, it's important that we see that we want to pass that on to people that want to do work, that people want to people that want to serve the Lord. That's incredibly important, not just for Elijah, but it should be for us as believers. And so I think that's kind of what we see here right off the get go in verse 19. And then um, and so Elijah allows Elisha to go and say goodbye, and then he does follow him and he assists him in verse 21. And ministry is not just something that you do just to do it, but you're assisting each other, you're helping each other go about ministry, and I think that's really cool to see with Elijah and Elisha there. Now, fast forward to 1 Kings 22. I said 2 Kings chapter 2, but we want to see one more thing, and that is the passing of King Ahab. So, King Ahab has been a big, well, let's just say antagonist, along with his wife Jezebel, in the life of Elijah. And if you recall in chapter 19, their household was going to come to an end at some point, and 1 Kings chapter 22 is that end. So not only for Ahab, but for his son Ahaziah as well. So, chapter 22, you see that Ahab is fighting against Syria, and he dies in battle against Syria in verse 37 of 1 Kings 22. So the king died and was brought to Samaria, and they buried the king in Samaria. And then they allowed his son Ahaziah to take his place in verse 51. Ahaziah, the son of Ahab, began to reign over Israel and Samaria in the 17th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and he reigned 2 years over Israel. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and walked in the way of his father, and in the way of his mother, and in the way of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin. He served Baal and worshipped him, and provoked the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger in every way that his father had done. So even if Ahaziah had been on Mount Carmel in 1 Kings chapter 18, he clearly did not learn anything from that experience and from that showdown between the Lord God against Baal and the prophets of Baal. And so he serves Baal, and that, of course, leads to 2 Kings chapter 1, where Moab now has gone against Israel, and Ahaziah is going against Moab, and Elijah basically speaks out against Ahaziah and kind of basically denounces him. So in 2 Kings chapter 1, he dies actually exactly to the way that the Lord that Elijah says that he would. So look at verse 17. Look at verse 17 of 2 Kings 1. So he died according to the word that Elijah had spoken. Jehoram became king in his place in the 2nd year of Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, because Ahaziah had no son. Now, I think that phrase there, Ahaziah had no son, is incredibly important because of 1 Kings chapter 19 and the promise that the line of Ahab and Jezebel would end. And we kind of see that here in 2 Kings chapter 1. But now we get to 2 Kings chapter 2, and that is where we say goodbye to Elijah the prophet, at least when it comes to the Old Testament. We'll get to that on Thursday. But 2 Kings chapter 1, or 2 Kings chapter 2, sorry, verse 1. Now when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. And Elijah said to Elisha, "Please stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel." But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. And the sons of the prophets who were in Bethel came out to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take away your master from over you?" And he said, "Yes, I know it. Keep quiet." Interesting conversation there for sure. But basically, it shows the importance of the mentorship of an older believer to a younger believer with Elijah and Elisha, to the point where Elisha loves to be in the presence of Elijah. Now, obviously, he doesn't worship Elijah as he worships the Lord, right? That would be bad. But he loves the advice and the knowledge and the wisdom that Elijah gives. And he doesn't want that taken away, but he understands that that is going to happen today. So, we see that continue on in verse 4, in verses 4 and 5, when it comes to another conversation. Um, and then it happens again in verse 6. So it's happening 3 times. And then finally, we see that this moment happens. So look at 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 7. 50 men of the sons of the prophets also went and stood at some distance from them, as they both were standing by the Jordan River. Then Elijah took his cloak and rolled it up and struck the water, and the water was parted to the one side and to the other, until the two of them could go over on dry ground. Now, what is this really getting at? I think the 50 men of the sons of the prophets, what I think is going on there is I want you to witness Elijah to these prophets. I want you to witness that Elisha really is called to be my not just successor, but to be a prophet as well. And I think the breaking of the water or the parting of the water is to go back again to the Pentateuch, where we see Moses part the Red Sea, yes, but see the we also see Moses parting the Jordan River to allow the people of Israel to cross as they go towards the promised land. So I think that's kind of what it's referencing to in verse 8. Then we have verse 9. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Ask what I shall do for you before I am taken from you." And Elisha said, "Please let there be a double portion of your spirit on me." And he said, "You have asked a hard thing. Yet, if you see me as I am being taken from you, it shall be so for you. But if you do not see me, it shall not be so." And as they still went on and talked, behold, chariots of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them. And Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven, and Elisha saw it, and he cried, my father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen. And he saw him no more. So we'll stop there. So we have this moment of the passing on of the prophet work, you could call it, from Elijah to Elisha. We have some prophets in the distance, in the background, to be a kind of witness of this. But then there's this great question: what shall I do for you? And Elisha gives a great response: please let there be double portion of your spirit on me. What is that getting at? That phrase, that sentence, really. I think what he's asking, what Elisha is asking, is not just for the spirit of zeal or of diligence, of endurance. I think it means all of that. But I think he's also asking for the wisdom and the relationship that Elijah has with the Lord. I think he's asking that because Elisha says that is a hard thing to ask. So what I'm thinking is, when it comes to this ask here, this request, could it be that he's asking for the Holy Spirit? Possibly. I think that's possible. But I think he's mainly talking about the relationship that Elijah has with the Lord. He wants to have that same exact relationship. And that is a very hard thing to pass on, right? Because obviously it's the Lord. He can do what he wants. So, but I think that's why Elijah says that is so difficult to see that. So why then does he make this condition? I think the reason why is because he wants Elisha to see how important the ministry is, how important serving the Lord is, but how big of a responsibility that is as well. How vital it is, but it's incredibly important that Elisha understands the weight of it. And as we saw in and because of that condition in verse 12, Elisha did see it, and so he will get that spirit. But I also love too the chariots of fire, the horses of fire. Again, it goes back to the book of Exodus, and then Elijah being taken up by a whirlwind into heaven, and then Elisha calling Elijah father. My father is a great ode to how important spiritual mentorship is. And then we see, and then we'll end it here. Let's end verse 12 here. Then he took hold of his own clothes and tore them into pieces. And he took up the cloak of Elijah that had fallen from him and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan River. Then he took the cloak of Elijah that had fallen from him and struck the water, saying, "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" And when he had struck the water was parted to the one side and to the other, and Elisha went over. Now, when the sons of the prophets who were at Jericho saw him opposite them, they said, "The spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha," which is what Elisha asked for in the question there in verse 9. So it's already coming about, which is incredible to see, right? And so that is that is kind of the succession to Elisha. Uh, and so for me, as somebody that was wanting to be a pastor in eighth grade, it was an incredible opportunity experience, but it was very weighty. And I really relied on a lot of older believers in my church at the time to try to figure out, is this real? Is this a real call? And it was an awesome experience to talk to older believers, but not that, just that, but older, um, but pastors in general. And I just love the wisdom that I was given, the knowledge that I was given from men that have gone through the pastoral ministry. And it was a great experience. And so that's kind of what we see here with the passing of the prophet work from Elijah to Elisha. And you may be thinking to yourself, okay, but I'm not a prophet, so what can I pass on? You can pass on the gospel. You can pass on the fire for the gospel, the love for the gospel, the call to serve Christ and to tell others about Jesus. You and I can pass that on no matter the age, but especially as we get older in this life and as we get older in our Christian walk. Yeah, we can definitely pass on that. And that is an incredible gift that we are given as believers. And it's awesome to see that here in the life of Elijah. However, he's not quite done yet. We do want to make a connection with him and John the Baptist in the New Testament and also see, why does he show up in the New Testament, especially at the Mount of Transfiguration in the Gospels? So we will get to that on Thursday. However, I'll see you with Brahmin Word tomorrow as well. Thanks.